Everyone thinks they know the Owsley story, the acid, the wall of sound, the legend. But here's what actually happened before any of that existed, before the wall of sound became the most ambitious sound system in rock history. Before the Grateful Dead had their own soundman, there was a moment, a single LSD trip in 1965, where Augustus Owsley Stanley III literally saw sound coming out of speakers. Not metaphorically. He watched it move through space like he could see the air itself vibrating. And that vision changed concert sound forever. This is the origin story. How Owsley Bear's LSD didn't just fuel the acid tests. It financed them, shaped them, and turned them into the laboratory where modern concert technology was born. Look, if you're a Deadhead, you know Owsley as Bear, the soundman, the guy who recorded everything. But in 1963, he was just a former Air Force electronics specialist at UC Berkeley reading scientific literature in the library. And here's where it starts. Not with music, not with concerts, but with pure curiosity about consciousness itself. Owsley taught himself to synthesize LSD by reading scientific papers. No formal chemistry training, no lab experience, just meticulous study and an obsessive attention to detail that would later define his approach to sound. He saw the synthesis procedure laid out in academic literature and thought, well, I can do this. So he ordered hundreds of grams of lysergic acid monohydrate, the precursor chemical, completely legally. In 1963, LSD wasn't scheduled yet. You could order the raw materials through scientific supply companies if you knew what you were looking for. He set up his laboratory in Point Richmond, California. Not some sketchy underground operation, Owsley approached this like an engineer solving a technical problem. He wanted to produce the purest LSD possible, and he wanted to understand what it did to human consciousness. This wasn't about getting high. This was about exploration. Mind Medicine Australia notes that after his first LSD trip, he realized it opened a door he wanted to explore. The experience gave him access to parts of his perception he didn't know existed. And the scale of what he did next is honestly hard to wrap your head around. ABC News reports he purchased 800 grams of lysergic acid monohydrate and produced approximately 2.5 million doses of LSD. Mind Medicine Australia puts the number closer to 300,000 doses. Either way, we're talking about a vast quantity of extraordinarily pure LSD produced in a home laboratory by a guy who'd never studied chemistry formally. Dennis McNally, the Dead's official biographer, said it plainly. Without Owsley, there simply wouldn't have been enough acid for the psychedelic scene of the Bay Area in the 60s to have ignited. So, that's the foundation. Owsley Bear's LSD wasn't just some side project, it was the fuel. But here's what separates this story from every other acid manufacturer of the era. Owsley had a vision for what to do with the profits. And it wasn't about getting rich. The Grateful Dead were nobody in 1965. They were the house band at Ken Kesey's Acid Tests, these free-form LSD-fueled parties around the San Francisco Bay Area where the merry pranksters would dose people with spiked Kool-Aid, turn on strobe lights, and see what happened. At the tests, Owsley distributed LSD to participants through spiked Kool-Aid or blotter tabs. A 2003 article from Mind Medicine Australia explains the acid tests were parties with musical performance along with strobe lights, fluorescent paint, and, of course, LSD. And it was Owsley's acid behind them. ABC News states he gave away approximately 1.25 million doses during the tests. Think about that for a second. He gave away half of what he produced. This wasn't a drug dealer protecting his product. This was someone who believed LSD could change consciousness on a mass scale, and he was willing to seed the movement for free. But the Dead, they became his focus. Owsley made a calculated decision that seems insane from a business perspective, but makes perfect sense when you understand his actual goals. He used the profits from LSD sales to bankroll the Grateful Dead completely. He bought them sound equipment, instruments, amplifiers. He paid their living expenses when they moved to Los Angeles for a series of tests. An obituary on the Allen Ginsberg Project notes that he was the band's first patron and that he bought equipment and used the band as a laboratory for his audio research. Author Andrew Goutman writes that Owsley became the Dead's first soundman and financed the group with money from his thriving LSD business. Why would someone manufacturing millions of doses of LSD decide to become a rock band's patron and soundman? Because Owsley didn't see himself as a chemist making money. He saw an opportunity to test theories about sound that had been forming in his head since that first synesthetic LSD experience. He needed musicians who would let him experiment. He needed a band that wouldn't care about commercial constraints or conventional concert formats. And he needed an audience willing to experience sound in altered states of consciousness. The Grateful Dead were perfect. They were broke, they were weird, and they were already the house band at the acid tests where everyone was dosed anyway. Owsley could finance them, control their sound system, and use them as guinea pigs for his audio theories. It wasn't philanthropy, it was strategic. He was building his laboratory, and the band was the centerpiece. According to his own account compiled by the Aether, Owsley first saw the Grateful Dead at an acid test. And here's the thing, the music initially scared him. Really scared him. It was loud, chaotic, nothing like what he expected music to sound like. The Dead at the acid tests weren't playing songs in any conventional sense. They were improvising, building soundscapes, creating audio environments that matched the psychedelic experience people were having. For someone coming from electronics and technical precision, it must have been jarring. But he thought the band was fantastic. Despite being scared, despite the chaos, he recognized something in what they were doing. Maybe it was their willingness to experiment. Maybe it was the way they treated music as malleable, not fixed. Whatever it was, he saw potential. He met them later at the Fillmore and immediately hooked up with them. There's this sense of inevitability in how he tells the story, like he knew instantly that this was his band. He decided to follow them to Los Angeles as their soundman, even though he had no formal audio engineering training. Just like with LSD synthesis, he taught himself. And just like with LSD, his lack of formal training meant he wasn't constrained by conventional thinking about how things should be done. The Dead didn't know it yet, but they'd just found their patron, their soundman, and their ticket to creative freedom. And Owsley had found his laboratory. And here's the thing Deadheads understand that casual fans don't. Owsley never wanted to be known as a chemist. In a 2003 correspondence, he insisted, "I am not and never was a chemist. I was soundman for a band, Grateful Dead, who were the house band at the acid tests." That's how he saw himself. The LSD was a means to an end. The end was perfect sound. So, what happened at the acid tests that turned Owsley into a sound revolutionary? It starts with that synesthetic LSD experience. Mind Medicine Australia quotes him directly. "I was looking at sound coming out of the speakers. During a psychedelic trip, he could see sound as a physical phenomenon emanating from the speakers." ABC News notes that he literally saw the sound coming from the speakers during an acid trip, and this launched his obsession with improving live sound. This wasn't just some trippy hallucination he dismissed the next day. It fundamentally changed how he understood audio. If you can see sound, you start asking different questions. Why does it look muddy? Why isn't it transparent? Why can't the audience hear exactly what the musicians hear on stage? The acid tests gave him a laboratory to answer those questions. These weren't organized concerts, they were chaos. When asked about the light and sound equipment at the tests, Owsley recalled that there was little planning. People simply collected gear and fucked around with it all night, stoned out of their gourds. He mentioned they tried an experimental sound system based on a central unit, but it didn't suit the band and was eventually abandoned. This is critical. The acid tests were informal laboratories where equipment was tested under absolutely chaotic conditions. No bosses pointing at their watch, no venue managers complaining, just experimentation. The Trips Festival in January 1966 at San Francisco's Longshoremen's Hall was the culmination. 3,000 to 5,000 people packed into a hall built for 1,700. Robert Greenfield's biography describes the scene. Revelers, many dosed with Owsley Bear's LSD, jumping from balconies onto blankets, while Hell's Angels scuffled with rival bikers. Dead biographer Dennis McNally noted, "There were simply more people tripping in a single room than anyone had ever seen before." Promoter Bill Graham, who'd later become the most famous rock promoter in history, ran around terrified, trying to control the crowd. But Owsley sensed something special going on. He understood what Graham couldn't see yet. This wasn't just a concert. This was a mass consciousness experiment, and the Dead were the soundtrack. And he did something crucial at that festival. He recruited Tim Scully, an electronics prodigy. After checking Scully out, Owsley brought him on to help assemble state-of-the-art sound equipment for the Dead and to mass-produce high-quality LSD. The Trips Festival incubated both his future manufacturing partner and his sound engineering innovations. The chaos of that night proved to Owsley that he needed help, both to scale up LSD production and to build the sound system he was envisioning. At early rock concerts, bands depended on primitive house PA systems and couldn't hear themselves properly. ABC News credits Owsley with inventing the stage monitor by simply turning speakers around on stage, allowing musicians to hear their own mix. Think about how basic that is, and how revolutionary. Before Owsley, musicians played while effectively deaf to their own sound. He then set out to build a stereo sound system where each instrument had its own channel, and the audience heard everything exactly as played. In the mid-1960s, this was unheard of. Author Michael Benson notes that at acid tests, there were no bosses pointing at their watch. The Dead could play a few good notes and walk off, and the audience loved it. The tests allowed the band to develop a free-form improvisational style they never abandoned. You can't experiment like that at a normal concert. You need an audience dosed on high-quality LSD who are there for the experience, not the hit singles. Owsley believed psychedelics gave him access to his head. Mind Medicine Australia quotes him, "I'm sure it was the root source of my ability to manipulate sound." This wasn't recreational drug use. This was Owsley Bear using LSD as a tool to understand audio perception at a deeper level. The synesthesia, the ability to perceive sound as a visual phenomenon, drove his obsession with sonic purity. His innovations at the acid test laid the groundwork for everything that came after. ABC News explains that his contributions included the stage monitor, the traveling PA, separate mic'd stereo sound, and live recordings. He insisted on minimal microphone count and refused to use EQ, instead positioning microphones physically to capture a natural stereo image. This philosophy would eventually culminate in the Wall of Sound, but the experimental ethos that spawned it began during the acid tests. The acid tests weren't just wild parties, they were proving grounds. Owsley used them to test experimental sound systems, recruit talented collaborators like Tim Scully, and observe how LSD altered perception of sound. He discovered the Grateful Dead at an acid test, joined them as a soundman, and began inventing the technologies that would define modern concert sound. Dennis McNally observed that without Owsley, there simply wouldn't have been enough acid for the psychedelic scene of the Bay Area in the 60s to have ignited. But it's deeper than that. Without Owsley Bear's LSD funding the Grateful Dead, without his synesthetic vision during acid trips, without the acid tests providing a laboratory free from commercial pressure, modern concert sound doesn't exist. Not in the form we know it. This is the origin story. Before the wall of sound, before the massive touring operation, before the mythology solidified. There was a guy in Point Richmond synthesizing LSD, a band playing at chaotic parties, and a vision of sonic purity born from watching sound move through space during a psychedelic experience. Owsley's mix of psychedelic vision and scientific precision laid the foundation for the modern concert experience. The acid tests proved that sometimes the most radical experiments begin in the most unlikely laboratories. In this case, a hall full of people dosed on high-quality LSD, watching a house band they didn't know were inventing the future of live music.